Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. It's well known that Xi Jinping is impatient to get back Taiwan, and there are various indications that he's picking up the pace. This month has seen an unprecedented number of incursions by China's military into Taiwanese airspace. Our next guest, Olivia Cheung, an academic at the School of Oriental and African Studies, says don't expect the pressure to ease. Question is, how will the rest of the world, notably the United States, react? Hello and welcome, Olivia.
Hello, Nicholas.
Great to have you with us. This is complex. It seems to me that we're reaching a sort of a boiling point, but these boiling points keep coming up again. So in some ways, it's pretty confusing. Can we just go over what's happened in the last few weeks, and then we'll delve a bit into China's strategy, how Taiwan's been dealing with it, and then further on, we'll talk about the US and the rest of the world's reaction. So first of all, what's been happening over the last few weeks?
Well, I think in the last few weeks, a lot of our attention, took our eyes away from Taiwan because of, more pressing issues, in the Middle East, in Ukraine and Russia and so on. But the Taiwan issue is real and imminent. And what happened is we have, a record number of, military maneuvers by Beijing in Taiwan's vicinity, not only in the last few weeks, but really like in the past few years, really. And if we, roll the clock back a bit more, under Xi Jinping, the number of, airspace incursions or maneuvers around the water of Taiwan by China's military has reached a record number. And this is a pattern we did not see before Xi Jinping. And under him, the pattern came across really prominently and has been sustained. And a wider context to that is he has been, as you rightly pointed out at the beginning, quite clear that the Taiwan issue need to be resolved. I mean, Chinese president said that all the time, but what is different about him is that under him, China's military capability has risen significantly. He has committed a lot to China's military budget to an extent that his post-Mao predecessors never did. So the risk of an escalation and of PRC actually having the ability to take over Taiwan successfully is looking more and more real.
Okay, Olivia, just to describe it, I think between the 1st and the 4th of October, an unprecedented number of Chinese aircraft flying into Taiwanese airspace, 38, I think, Air Force jets in one day, which is the highest number ever. I'm trying to understand the strategy behind that. I mean, that seems very, very aggressive. Yet at the same time, some nuanced statements coming out of Beijing at the same time. So let's deal with the nuanced statements in a second. But just that very risk of conflict. Can we just describe what the situation is militarily? You've talked about a growing Chinese, we know how strong China's been getting. We know how they've been building up their military, trying to build up their naval force as well as, of course, their air force as well. But what's the situation on the other side of the Taiwanese Straits? What does Taiwan have?
Well, so Taiwan recently has, launched its own submarine. And Taiwan has also been steadily increasing its military capacity in light of Beijing's threat. But the reality is, no matter how much Taiwan has increased its military spending, the view by Washington and by most analysts is that it is far from enough in deterring Beijing. So there is a common view in Taiwan that the government isn't doing enough militarily for deterrence. But like one policy change under the current Taiwanese president is that the duration for mandatory military conscription for men in Taiwan has been extended from 4 months to 1 year. And that is, a direct response to like perceived, growing danger of what is happening across the strait. And, a wider military context is that Taiwan is in a geopolitically extremely important location. It is, if you lose Taiwan, I mean, if China get Taiwan, then what effectively it means is that the United States would lose control of the first island chain. And the first island chain refers to, the area in the Western Pacific from Japan all the way down to Malaysia, passing Taiwan. And now this is an area that the United States really value, being able to have its ships around, freedom of navigation. And this is also an area where a lot of goods that, we use that, are sold to the world pass by. So, like sea lane, sea traffic is extremely important to business and to our everyday life. And the United States has patrolled that area frequently. So if China take control over Taiwan, if Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan is being realized, then what we are effectively saying is the whole geopolitics of the Pacific Ocean, the Western Pacific, would change. And it has fundamental implication to the U.S. alliance system. I mean, to put more, pointedly, no one would trust that the United States is, can keep its promises or has the ability to defend its allies and partners, and that would have huge implications to
okay,
US
so that's the risk of US failure. That's the risk of the United States not being able to defend Taiwan, its ally, and therefore there's a sort of domino effect, if you like, for other allies within the region. I want to come back to it in a second, but I want to stick to this risk of this idea, the risk of conflict. If you're flying that many aircraft across the Taiwanese Straits, and I just wanted to get the idea. I mean, I know Taiwan is nothing compared to China, but it is nevertheless, it has got a series of very strong defensive measures. It's got anti-ship capabilities, it's got anti-aircraft missiles, it's called the Porcupine, and we could talk about that a bit later too. But the point is, there's a real risk here, isn't there, of a mistake happening, and that's what I'm trying to understand. I don't understand why China wants to keep poking when there's a real risk here of a conflagration, a real risk that things could blow up.
Well, like what you are saying is really like the risk for miscalculation keep increasing if there are no real limit on when you stop escalation. And I think you're right. I mean, that is very dangerous, and China is playing with fire. By keep escalating, military maneuvers over Taiwan.
So what are they hoping to achieve? Are they actually hoping for a conflict, or is their strategy something which is more complex, more long term?
Well, ideally, China would not want to use force to take back Taiwan. So, the ideal scenario is still peaceful unification or reunification, whatever you call that. But whether that is achievable is another question. And in many ways, it is looking increasingly unlikely. I mean, those military maneuvers across Taiwan Strait in the airspace and in the ocean are obviously not well received. And it is an escalation. But what China really is thinking is, it has been kept doing it for years. And that, what does it lead to? I mean, it so far has led to, we have seen what it led to, actually. We have seen the United States returning very strongly under Biden to the Pacific, reinvigorating alliances and partnership. We see the AUKUS agreement being signed, where United States and the UK are sharing nuclear submarine technology with Australia that was unheard of previously. And we saw the Quad alliance system where US, Japan, India, and South Korea are strengthening their partnership, and all these are targeting China, so as a way of defending against China. So what we are seeing is what China has been doing has directly led to the security environment of the Western Pacific becoming very tense, really, but it hasn't yet led to a direct confrontation between any of these militaries and the People's Liberation Army of China, not at this point.
Okay, well, let's turn then to what, if we can, to Xi Jinping's thinking. We've said already that obviously China has long held this wish to reunify, to retake Taiwan. This goes back to 1949 when the nationalist forces fled to the island of Taiwan, and the communists won that war. Both sides believed in unification. It's now that Beijing obviously has the upper hand and has, if there was to be unification, it would be under its auspices. What is Xi Jinping's timetable? What has he said publicly about this?
So Xi Jinping does have a deadline for reunification, and that would be 2049, the centenary of the People's Republic.
That seems a long way off, doesn't it? 2049.
Well, I mean, if you're planning for a war of that scale, I mean that seems like prudent, to start that level of planning. And PLA modernization is a huge undertaking. So 2049 or the latest 2050, so mid-century, and that was a goal that he delivered. He publicly committed when he was re-elected. I mean, unanimously or nearly unanimously in 2017 to be the head of the Chinese Communist Party, which also make him the de facto head of the country. I mean, Xi Jinping currently holds 3 titles: head of the party, head of the country, head of the military. But really, the most important title that really calls all shots is head of the party. But formally, he is all 3. So he is in charge of China's Taiwan policy. And, taking Taiwan by 2049 or 2050, the latest, is a commitment that he made publicly in 2017, repeated again later on several years, and he doesn't seem to budge there. So this is actually the first time ever that we have a leader from the PRC setting, naming a year as to when this needs to happen. Well, previously, I think all sides, China, Taiwan, United States, are all a lot more careful in the language. And they won't publicly commit to any year.
Okay, so on the one hand, you've got this ideological framework set out, this publicly announced goal, so everyone knows that this is what you want to do. And then militarily, in terms of the actual things taking place, he's actually showing he's got muscle. He's showing he's very serious about it. But I'm still trying to work out this timetable, because that seems to me that if you're flying aircraft across the Taiwan Straits, it seems like you want action this year or next year, not by 2049. Let's talk a bit about how China sees itself. I'm trying to think about the way he deals with issues, and maybe this will help a bit in terms of if clearly the West is not going to be very happy about him. Well, it's not happy, and that's why they've been ramping up the security framework in the region. But I'm trying to understand a sort of disconnect between the two, the real risks that he's taking and what he's ready to commit to internally. And I guess this is part, I'm guessing that this is part of, that for him, the Communist Party is monolithic. What he says goes. It's not a question of if he says something, it's going to happen. There's no question of the risk is something he shouldn't be too concerned about. I'm waffling here, but I'm trying to grasp at something.
Well, I think, thank you very much for really, pushing me to, get to the point. Yeah. Why is it that we see, fighter jets and all these, military activities in the ocean, while, the publicly committed timetable is still, some quite many years off, although I said it would take time for military buildup. So I think to understand this puzzle, we need to take a step back and think about Chinese foreign policy as a whole package. So under Xi Jinping, Chinese foreign policy has become noticeably more assertive and even more aggressive. So the activities we saw by the Chinese military around Taiwan is only one part of that. We also have, sustained Chinese, buildup in South China Sea, disputed, disputed rocks, disputed, islands that Chinese military has militarized. To an extent, all claimants of South China Sea, the disputed areas, all countries that claim that it owned that area, all have done some buildup over the year. But no one to the scale that China has done under Xi Jinping. So that scale and that speed and how it militarized South China Sea is unprecedented. And under Xi Jinping, we see China really talking very tough to the United States. And many argue that, well, what China does is, self-defense. So under Trump, Trump imposed sanctions on Chinese companies on various grounds, on unfair trade practices, on China's treatment over the Uyghurs and so on. So China kind of retaliated by, imposing also its own sanctions on US companies, on individuals in the United States. And moreover, in general, we just see much more assertive Chinese activities. We think about what happened to the two Michaels, the two Canadian diplomats, one diplomat and one business person who were detained in Beijing. And that was Beijing's retaliation of Vancouver arresting the chief financial officer of Huawei on US request. So the two Michaels were detained, and another Canadian citizen, he was previously convicted of a criminal offense, I believe drug trafficking in China. And as the events unfold, as China's relationship with Canada turned really bad, this person's sentence became escalated to a death penalty with no chance for, revoking it. So it was things across the board that is happening, and not to mention what is happening with the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region of China, where they are clearly there are massive human rights abuses, and by many definitions, approaching to the UN formal definition of a genocide. So many things happening across the board, showing that China has become a lot more authoritarian, a lot more uncompromising, and there are deadly clashes with India over Sino-Indian border. So all these you add together, you see that it is assertive Chinese foreign policy across the board, and the Taiwan picture fits into this. So Xi Jinping wants the world to know China has arrived, and China need to be treated respectfully. And all these are showing other countries that you shouldn't, deal with China in a way that China doesn't want you to. And China would not hesitate to show you that it is unhappy.
So is there any internal opposition to this? I mean, we were presented the idea that obviously Xi Jinping has centralized power massively and become very repressive within China. So I'm wondering how people can, if they don't agree with the direction of things, or if there's any kind of internal dissent, how is that actually shown? I note that in June this year, the foreign minister disappeared from view and then was changed. And then September, the defense minister disappeared from view. What's going on there?
I think we don't for sure knows what is happening. But going back to what you say is indeed, China under Xi Jinping has become a lot more repressive. And the foreign minister who disappeared and the defense minister who also disappeared, they are both clear loyalists of Xi Jinping, and they got their current position because Xi Jinping put them there. So it was not in Xi Jinping's favor that they disappeared. So something really bad and shocking happened inside the top level of China to lead to those disappearances. And what exactly it is, we do not know. There are various speculations. And most likely it had to do with something that would lead Xi Jinping to feel very insecure and lead him to feel betrayed, and that their loyalty from the foreign minister and the defense minister were actually hypocritical. So it had to be events that led him to that conclusion, so that they were removed. Do
you think that these are decisions he didn't want to take and he was embarrassed into taking? I mean, it's really
exactly. He is embarrassed to take them, but those decisions, I'm not in Xi Jinping's mind, but from what I can see, I would say very, very, very likely it's not because they disagree with his foreign policy. It's not because they disagree with the direction of travel he's taking on Taiwan or on any major issue. It has to do with something of a much more operational level that Xi Jinping feels unhappy about. It is not a conflict on direction. Because previously, when you do see major, drastic personal purges in Chinese politics, quite often it can be due to ideological disputes. I don't like how you take China, and our factions have disagreements on that, and my faction got purged, and I am a key member of the faction. So my downfall represent that the direction of travel that my faction want to take is not one that is one that is being defeated. But the recent purchase should not be taken in that direction. It is going to be something of a much more operational level, much more of internal policy implementation or about their personal conduct that Xi Jinping find entirely unacceptable. And quite likely what happened is something that Xi Jinping should have known and they didn't tell him. So there would definitely be a sense that he got betrayed. Xi Jinping felt being betrayed by people who he personally promoted, but it's nothing to do with policy direction.
There's some great questions coming in, so I'm actually going to start taking some questions earlier, and some of them sort of focus on Taiwan's politics as well, so we come to that in a second. But let's take a first question from Paul Jackson. Paul, if you just open your microphone, we can take your question. Just open your microphone. Paul's, there you go. Go ahead now.
There you go. Hello. Hi, Olivia. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes, hello. Well done. Thank you so far. I'm just thinking, is the Chinese actually trying to provoke one of their planes to be shot down? And that would be just the reason for the invasion? I mean, what other reason is all this going on for?
Yeah, I mean, you've short my question much simpler than my waffling on. There you go. Olivia.
Well, the thing is, if China need to invade Taiwan, say today, tomorrow, it is simply not ready. I mean, China would not win, and Xi Jinping would not let China fight the war over Taiwan unless he has a high degree of certainty that he will win. But he doesn't have that. The thing is, the People's Liberation Army under Xi Jinping has grown much stronger, and it is on a sustained, committed program on military modernization, but it has a very long way to go. The military gap between China and the United States is stark at this point.
So, Olivia, just to repeat that question so what's he trying to do? Is that just political pressure? I mean, hoping that he's not going to make a mistake, and so that you keep up the pressure without actually doing anything?
I think it is intimidation in a large measure, but like what we said earlier, it's very dangerous intimidation and a kind of intimidation that risks escalation and also a miscalculation that bring you into war much sooner than you anticipated. So it's highly dangerous, but it is intimidation. It is deterrence. It is squeezing Taiwan's diplomatic space, and it's taking place at a time where Taiwan people have to think about Taiwan's future.
Yeah. A really dangerous strategy. Let's bring with that good question. You're talking about the Taiwanese people and how they're reacting. A great question coming up from Georg Blaha. Georg, go ahead with your question.
Hi, thanks, Nicholas. Hi, Olivia. Great speech and very interesting to catch up on Taiwan's recent developments. I understand that besides the military threats and the threatening and the bullying, that China is considering or even has decided to offer also some positive incentives for Taiwan to come under the People Republic's influence. For example, a kind of a scheme or concept to make it easier for Taiwanese people to settle in Fujian in cities like Xiamen or Ningde, and to use this kind of positive influence to bring Taiwan under China's influence. It reminds me a bit of the years of President Ma Ying-jeou in 2008 when cross-strait relations were very good. So how do you see those positive incentives?
Yeah, thank you. I think like what people in mainland China call that is Beijing is pursuing a two direction strategy. The one direction is things that are soft get even softer, and things that are hard get even harder. So what you are describing just now are the soft things that get softer, like the carrot and stick approach. You get more carrots and even, a thicker stick, to put it in my language. So what China really trying to do is to take advantage of the fact that Taiwan has a very high unemployment rate currently, and actually an issue that China itself also struggles with. So those economic enticements, along coastal cities of China, that is closest to Taiwan, encouraging Taiwan people, especially young people, to settle there, to give them, various conveniences so they can work there more easily. They are a way of, enticing them to China's embrace. You can't find a job in Taiwan. Look, why don't you start up your business here? We have all kinds of supportive policies to encourage you, to help you do what you want. So those are things that are rolling out. But I think fundamentally, the way it's reaching a limit on how much it would work, because like what we have said earlier, all those military intimidation, they really work counter purposes to any carrots that you give out to the people. And a much bigger framework is like the political solution that China has been putting forward to Taiwan is the framework of one country, two systems. Back when it was first introduced in 1980s by the late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, it was not meant to be used on Hong Kong or Macau. When Deng Xiaoping thought about one country, two systems, he discussed that in the context of Taiwan. And the idea being that China and Taiwan come together as one country under the sovereignty of PRC, People's Republic of China, but Taiwan would be allowed to practice its own political and economic system, which means, you continue your capitalist market economy and you continue your elections. As long as, you don't spread those to the PRC, then we leave you alone. So that was basically like the gist of that design. And at that time, it might seem like something that might be feasible because China itself was undergoing economic liberalization quite rapidly to the point that today we can debate whether China is capitalist. And that showed how much China has opened its economy compared to a Maoist, self-isolationist economy previously. So China was changing when it offered one country, two systems. But when you look at what is happening now, that framework, from the perspective of people in Taiwan, especially the younger people of Taiwan, that just look like a joke. Like they look at how one country, two system is being applied in Hong Kong, and they think about the 2019 anti-extradition bill protest in Hong Kong, which ended up in police brutality, being violently suppressed by China, and a record number of Hong Kong people leaving Hong Kong, seeking immigration status, and for a lot of them, political asylum in developed countries. So in that context, it's very hard for Taiwan people to accept that there is a peaceful political solution that Beijing tables that actually works. And I think we are really in very difficult waters here. Beijing's solution, one country, two system, is one that Taiwan people increasingly find unconvincing. And like Beijing keep escalating, military tension around Taiwan, causing countries around the Pacific Ocean or in Europe, in the United States, and in Taiwan, all very nervous. And at the same time, Taiwan is pushing for its own, election. Taiwan is going to have an election for the president in January, and the issue on, how do you settle the question with China now that you're increasingly being pushed to make a decision. It's being really uncomfortable. Like previously, for a very long time, the conventional wisdom is not an ideal status quo, but we maintain what is the case. So we call that strategic ambiguity. Every side try to be more diplomatic towards each other. We are not resolving, the Taiwan or China question once and for all, but it is, something good enough for us to keep together so that we are all peaceful. But by increasing military pressure towards Taiwan and by setting, a deadline for reunification, Xi Jinping really made quite clearly that maintaining the status quo forever is really not an option. While at the same time, the political solution he offered, one country, two systems, is seen by people in Taiwan as really not something they can swallow. So you have Olivia, a real dilemma here.
So you're talking about increasing opposition to China's strategy. They don't believe in the one country, two systems. How do people react when they saw those jet fighters, flying into the airspace in early October? What was the reaction of people in the cafes in Taipei? Were people nervous about it? What do you think?
Well, I think this happens too much. Like we as analysts, we react with a sense of alarm, or like we keep record, we keep tallies on how often it happens, we analyze it. But for people on the ground, it is becoming a part of daily life. People who live in Taiwan, who do their everyday life there. Oh, it happens again. Like Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. And, a much more robust, Chinese foreign policy can be traced back to 2008, even before Xi Jinping. It was, after the global financial crisis that China, Beijing, really came to the conclusion that the United States and Western countries are just paper tigers. They can't keep their house in order. Economically, they're in chaos. Their politics is too polarized. They can't really do anything. And then with the election of Trump, Brexit, that idea of, the West is actually quite powerless and it won't really come to Taiwan's defense, or its foreign policy is fundamentally they don't have that much capacity to police around the world. That thinking really become mainstream consensus in Beijing. And it was in that background that Xi Jinping came to power. So it is not only Xi Jinping being a very, assertive person, and he has, grand goals and ideals he wants to achieve for China. He called it the China dream of national rejuvenation. So Xi Jinping is one factor, and I think a very decisive factor. But behind that, a bigger background is a very strong belief in China's political elites that the best time for the West has passed. And, the East is rising, the West is declining, and this is already unfolding before their eyes. And the catchphrase they use is profound transformations unseen in a century. Right? When they say profound transformations unseen in a century, it quite simply means the US and the West are declining and China is rising. So with that being what they believe as an irreversible historical trend, they believe time is on their side. And fundamentally, it means that with time, Taiwan would definitely return to the PRC. That is the calculation.
Okay, let's take a question. Microphone.
Nicholas is cutting out. Let's take Philip's question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I wondered to what extent you feel that the Americans' CHIPS Act is going to weaken America's fundamental ties with Taiwan when they wean themselves off the semiconductor, specialist semiconductor industry that's so critical to them at the moment. Will that, play out, do you think?
So you're asking, really, putting it in the context of Taiwan, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
Yeah.
How does it enter the picture, really, on all these calculations? So China and all countries in the world are heavily reliant on the semiconductor manufacturing of a Taiwan company called TSMC. And if there is, an outbreak of a war around or over Taiwan, what is certain is there will be a very chronic semiconductor shortage. And that would mean that many of the things that we take for granted would have a huge production shortage. So everyday life, economy are going to be disrupted. So this is also why the Taiwan issue is not only about the Western Pacific and not only about China and Taiwan, is very global. It is very serious. So what China has been doing under Xi Jinping, investing a lot of money in it, is to really ramp up the ability to do what it called indigenous innovation. And what it means is Xi Jinping wants China to eventually be able to produce sufficient semiconductor to supply all domestic demand. And this, to many people, this sounds like absolutely crazy because the semiconductor supply chain is highly globalized, and manufacturing in Taiwan also take many steps in different countries as well. So it's a globalized supply chain with Taiwan as a heavy manufacturing site. But what China wants to do is really to onshore semiconductor production inside the mainland of China as much as possible. And this is about decoupling strategic industry from Taiwan or from any other country so that China can prepare for an extreme scenario. Now, the word Xi Jinping uses is an extreme scenario. And to many in the PRC, whether it be political elites or ordinary citizens, they think he's talking about war over Taiwan. So shoring up China's semiconductor production capacity is something that China has been working very, very hard on, effectively with an unlimited budget. And what is really quite interesting here is this is a task that has been supported by American companies. Like American multinational companies are working very hard to help China to build up semiconductor production capacity. It is a very lucrative business for them, and they have a strong stake in it. So they were enticed to do it to help China to build up that capacity so China can be more self-reliant in cutting edge technology, which means that in the event of a war, China would be affected less. But so American companies do that, Intel, Qualcomm, Dell, you name it. They all have a large presence in China, although they are also increasingly, especially since 2023, starting to, set up manufacturing sites elsewhere to hedge against, China being unstable or Xi Jinping's, repressive policies, which make businesses feel very uncertain. But the reality is still that they have a large presence in China, and although they are also offshoring to different countries, they are also simultaneously expanding in China and contributing to the strategic industries, including especially semiconductor, that Xi Jinping really cares a lot about personally, especially for the planning of an extreme scenario.
Olivia, is there any indication of a timetable? If you were to say if there was to be a conflict now, it would have catastrophic risks for China's wider economic and foreign policy objectives. It would be disastrous. But at what point would it not be? At what point do you think that uncoupling will have taken place and that it can take that kind of risk?
Well, the thing is, Nicholas, I think what we see, what we analysts think, and what Xi Jinping think can be very different. I think, I do genuinely believe that if China goes into war with Taiwan, no one wins. I mean, even, if the military wins, the military of China wins, I don't think it's a real win. I mean, everyone's going to lose. It's going to be very bad. But whether Xi Jinping thinks the same, that's another question. Now, I think what really need to happen is if the world wants to deter a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, there is a need to really get across the message to Xi Jinping that it is going to be very bad for China. It's going to be very bad for him. It's going to be very bad for the Chinese Communist Party. And until that message really can get across, then I think his calculations are still leaning in favor of an invasion if his timetable, according to his timetable, by 2049, 2050. So whether, it will be very bad, we have objective calculation, but we also have, his own calculation. And the thing is, the sentiments in mainland China are overwhelmingly thinking that what is happening today is really not because of any fault on China's part. It is not because of, Chinese military, flexing its muscles and intimidating Taiwan and causing the security in the region to be very tense. What they see is the United States is what they call the black hand behind the scene. Now, the United States is being blamed for the massive protests in Hong Kong in 2019 that led to massive immigration out of Hong Kong. At that time, Beijing said the U.S. is the black hand, instigating this protest, telling protesters what to do behind the scene because the U.S. want to undermine China. Now, the same calculus same narrative is being used to depict what is happening. Now, they said, look, the U.S. House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. Previously, no U.S. House speakers did that. And look, another delegation from the U.K. visited Taiwan with, informal approval from the U.S. and so on. So what they see is the U.S. unilaterally, and I would emphasize the word unilaterally, U.S. unilaterally providing support to Taiwan and hence, instigating or mobilizing pro-independent forces in Taiwan. Hence, causing them to be emboldened, to be, more willing to, turn against Beijing and leading to the current crisis. So what China really thinks is if the United States back off, then everything will be very peaceful. And if the United States, back off to the extent of where it used to be before 2012, by 2008, it would be a lot more peaceful already. So what they see is the United States and with other countries in the Western Pacific, Australia and Japan and India, really encircling and cornering China. They are becoming very aggressive. And what, I just now described as, U.S. patrol, freedom of navigation patrol, China, a mainstream narrative in China question the legality of that. They see that as U.S. provoking China and U.S. using the Taiwan issue to try to undermine China. So when you have that kind of narrative in China being, supported by quite a lot of, mainstream public opinion, then you have you're forming an echo chamber in the elite level in Beijing. And what it also means is if China uses force against Taiwan, there is popular backing in the mainland of China.
Okay, so that worries you a lot, both the failure of debate, lack of debate within society, and lack of debate within the party. Let's take a question from Marty Ryan, and I've got a follow-up. So go ahead, Marty, with your question.
Yes, Olivia, you've just started to talk about this, and I'm wondering if the intimidation that China is executing right now might be a case of bullying to see who's going to stand up to them. And I'm wondering if not a military confrontation, but if multiple Western nations who are against what China is doing would come together to say or show China that this is what you're up against. I'm wondering if that is either part of Xi Jinping's strategy or if that would back him down.
So, Marty, I think that's already happening. I think Olivia's mentioned some of it. She'll mention it again. There's an alliance between the UK, Australia, and the United States to build submarines for Australia, and there's certainly more Western influence. I'm interested in that question too, how that's going, but I'm also interested about the region. The Philippines has come under huge pressure from China. What's Vietnam doing? So I'm talking about those immediate neighbours as well. So if Olivia could best address both those questions, both what Western nations are doing to oppose China within the region, but what's also happening locally.
I think in a way we touch about that a lot. Western nations and Vietnam and Philippines, they are all very uncomfortable about what is happening around the region, and there is a general sense that they would very strongly oppose China using force against Taiwan. I think that is well established. But I think to really get to what is happening around the region and what Western nations are doing in response, we need to take, a big step back. And allow me to bring in, the concept of world order. And it seems like such a big concept that does it really mean anything? And I think in this context, it really does. Now, Xi Jinping isn't a very elegant thinker. But he does like to, think big things, and I like to, use, big concepts to guide, his policy. And this is what he loves to do. And one big concept that he really buys in a lot is called all under heaven, and that is a literal translation from me. And in the Chinese term, it's tianxia, literally, heaven and earth, or all under heaven. And that referred to the ancient world order in the region that we call East Asia today. So we are talking about, the time before East Asia become colonized by Japan or Western powers. We are talking about dynastic emperor, some thousands of years ago. And at that time, China was really the center of East Asia. And given the logistical and transportation capability of that time, China felt that it was the center of the world. The Middle Kingdom, that mentality was very strong. And China at that time had a very strong economy. So countries that, show deference to China and acknowledge China's superiority actually can benefit from trading with China. So in a way, if you acknowledge that, China is more powerful than you and you don't challenge Beijing authority, you get economic advantages. And do we see a similarity here? Yeah. And then China also see itself as the center of civilization, Chinese writing system being spread across East Asia. And China pioneered civil servants exam, which was meritocratic. And that was considered, highly innovative and refreshing and really helpful. And many countries in East Asia copy that. And they also, send gifts to Beijing. They send envoys. They have envoys to send gifts to Beijing a few times every year. Different countries have different frequency of doing it. But the overall pattern that we are seeing is that they show deference to Beijing. In exchange for Beijing leaving them alone, Beijing not messing with their internal affairs, and Beijing trading with them and also offering platforms for them to trade with each other. And so what Xi Jinping, this is tianxia, all under heaven, and Xi Jinping loves that. And he at many times has talked about how the world was such a good place, so harmonious when Tianxia was the world order. And he sometimes used the word Tianxia when he speaks to an international audience. And the first time that he actually did that, he was at a conference in Beijing called the Chinese Communist Party and World Political Parties. So the CCP hosted, I believe, like 300 guests who are like members, like leaders of political parties all around the world. Some are incumbent parties, some are opposition parties, you name it. Around the world, they came to Beijing and to listen to Xi Jinping give a important speech. And there Xi Jinping talked about Tianxia. And Tianxia, he used that, interchangeably with a more respectable term called common destiny for humankind, which is frequently mistranslated as community for common destiny of humankind, although the word community never appeared in the original Chinese text. So Xi Jinping really wants to recreate Tianxia, like the idea that, you let China does, what it wants to do, and China leaves you alone to handle your own internal affairs, and you have economic benefits by, playing nice with China. That is what he wants to recreate. So what he believes, he's using a range of tools to do that. Diplomatic tools, Belt and Road Initiative, winning friends in the third world, trying to gain influence in the United Nations and other international organizations. Like many things he does, his foreign policy, in my view, really add up to trying to recreate Tianxia. And if Tianxia is recreated, then it is not in any country's self-interest to oppose China. That would suggest that by 2049, 2050, other countries are very much interested to back off in the case of a conflict between China and Taiwan. And, ideally, Taiwan would voluntarily, want to, go back to Beijing because it is seen as such a, attractive proposition. So this is what he really wants. I mean, whether this is too romantic, unrealistic, that's another question.
I'm really struck by the idea. If you think of the old sort of Chinese imperial system of vassal status and other provinces and countries paying tribute to the emperor, even to the extent of not allowing their roofs of their palaces to have, more than 2 stacks, because you could only have 3 if you were the emperor. That idea really sort of strikes home. Lois Towett, you've got a question that sort of follows on from this. Go ahead, Lois.
Hi, Olivia, as you can tell, I'm actually from the land down under, and I have travelled to Taiwan, and I can thoroughly recommend it as a destination. I did enjoy everything I did in Taipei. Really, I've got more of a question about wildcards in the mix, in that we're starting to see a bit of the defections, that is things like technical people and possibly business people deciding that they just want to permanently relocate out of China. Do you think that it's perfectly feasible that one of these military jets decides to land and says, I wish to defect because possibly say I'm gay and I can't live in China anymore. So they're the kind of wild cards that when you start throwing them into the mix might add further nuances to the whole situation.
Wow, I mean, that's interesting. Thank you for raising that. I think several things you touch on there. The first thing about, businesses thinking that China is not the place to invest. I mean, like many major businesses are rethinking China, whether it is a place they want to expand their investment. That is real. But at the same time, no businesses are pulling out from China permanently. They're reducing their presence, but because of how large their presence is in China already and how much money is already in, dropping the China market completely is seen as impossible, unrealistic to many of them. Now, whether that would change one day because of China being more repressive is an open question, but I don't see that being changed in the next 10 years at least, because, Xi Jinping is repressive, but at the same time, he is also very pragmatic. So when he does things that can look, contradictory at the same time. So, for example, there are major, U.S. business intelligence consulting firms. They were being investigated by Beijing authorities, by the police for national security reasons, and that is considered something really bad. If you're caught up in a national security investigation, that's like really bad news. And U.S. Business intelligence firms are being caught up in that. They paid huge fines. They're made to apologize. Their offices are raided, and their Chinese staff, Chinese employees in the Chinese office, some were detained. So it is being seen as a very unwelcoming environment. So this is national security investigation, and adding to that mix, you have anti-monopoly investigation. So Qualcomm in 2013 was hit with a 14-month-long investigation, and it ended up paying 8% of its revenue to China to settle the investigation, and that wasn't the end of it. On top of that, it set up business partnership, set up joint ventures with Chinese state-owned enterprises to share technology, sensitive technology that Xi Jinping sees as cutting edge to them. And then Qualcomm also set up a fund to help Chinese tech startup. So you would think, this is really, intimidating. You hit Qualcomm, a massive American telecom giant that also, does semiconductor. You hit them with a heavy fine on anti-monopoly and also squeeze that many concessions out of them. So you would think, other companies would be deterred to, do business in China. But what happened, in the 2 years after Qualcomm's investigation was that we saw 11 American multinational companies, including, really big names, IBM, Intel, whatever, like all these really big names, they all, entered into joint ventures with state-owned enterprises in China to, help them develop technology that Xi Jinping wants. So you see, the thing is like there is a sense in American business, the businesses that Xi Jinping actually really cares because they have the technology that he really wants. They also believe that China is a market that they cannot leave. Beijing pushes really hard, using Qualcomm as a negative example. And then what we saw is a domino effect of all American multinational companies, tech companies, all falling to line. But to complicate that picture, the nuance to add to that a bit is, like what you said, Louis, earlier, we do see decoupling happening, especially in 2023, this very year. Many more announcements of decoupling, like Tesla. Like Elon Musk said, he loves China. But Tesla, is now, I'm going to set up a factory in India to hedge, from China. And Apple, for the first time, is starting to make, is iPhone in Vietnam, so not only in China. And Dell said, components made in China, increasingly it is pursuing a strategy that components made in China, they only use it in products sold in China. So we see that they are expanding in China. They do what Xi Jinping wants them to do, set up joint ventures with Chinese state-owned enterprises. But at the same time, they're also, hedging. They are balancing against China. It's happening simultaneously. So it's a very complex picture. But what it also means is, if they, keep, hedging, and if that scale widens, then China would be having less leverage over them in the case of a crisis. But this is something that is only very slowly taking place. We are talking about a trend that only start to emerge at the very beginning phase in our own eyes.
Olivia, is there any split within Taiwan about policy towards China? Can you talk about the two main political parties, the Democratic Progressive Party and the KMT? I won't try and say its name in Chinese, but go ahead.
Thank you, Nicholas. So the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, is the current ruling party of Taiwan. And it has always been a lot more vocal, a lot more explicit in its pursuit for Taiwan independence. And its opposition party is the KMT. And the KMT was the political party that fled from the mainland of China to what we call Taiwan today, back in the early days, back in 1949, when the PRC was founded by the Chinese Communist Party in the mainland of China. So the KMT today is a lot more restrained in its language. It is very worried about provoking China. It, positioned itself as adopting a pragmatic attitude, flexibility, pragmatism in its approach towards China. And like the election that will take place in January would be a context between DPP and KMT, although there are other, players, other people who run in the election. But like so far in Taiwan, it has always been a two-party system. So likely it would be these two parties locked against each other, trying to, see who would be the party turning out the next president of Taiwan.
So if the DPP is very much doubles down and is very pro this alliance with the US, the KMT has more of a split. It sees its relationship with China having more economic opportunities whilst protecting its own sovereignty.
Yes, you're right. And I think it is not only, a recent change. Like these two parties have been adopting these stances for a few decades already. So back in 2008, actually, there was a referendum in Taiwan, and the question was on whether, so a referendum where the population, the public, the Taiwan voters were asked to vote in. The question was whether Taiwan should seek UN membership. So Taiwan used to hold the UN seat for China. It was in, I believe, 1979 that the China seat in the United Nations lost to Taiwan. PRC took the China seat. And what happened was the United States normalized relations with China and formally severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan. And when that happened, other countries followed suit, and that led PRC to take the seat of the United Nations away from the Taiwan government, and because that seat was called the China seat, so the PRC holds the China seat. So the 2008 referendum in Taiwan was a question on whether Taiwan should reapply to join the United Nations. And the DPP and KMT each put forward, different wording for the referendum. So the voters were asked to vote for, A and B, and A was a DPP wording and B is a KMT wording. So the DPP wording said, should Taiwan apply to join the UN in the name of Taiwan? And the KMT wording said, should Taiwan apply to join the UN using flexible and pragmatic means, using names such as Republic of China, Taiwan, or any other means or names suitable. So you can see the differences there. And that was 2008. And interestingly, that referendum was invalid because the voter turnout was very low. I think it was a 36% voter turnout, so it's too low to be valid. And at that time, at the referendum, I believe China actually didn't do any serious, no military maneuvering around Taiwan Strait, and that was 2008. And China was relatively low-key at the whole time when it was happening. It was only that when it was invalidated and China said, look, this isn't a good idea. Taiwan people didn't buy the idea of, trying to seek more diplomatic recognition for Taiwan. So that also shows how much things have changed. You don't have a referendum like that, in current circumstances. But from Beijing's perspective, increasingly they are seeing that if you vote for the DPP, if the DPP, wins another re-election, they see it as almost, de facto confirmation that Taiwan want to push the envelope even further.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we've covered practically everything. I mean, I think that there's a clock ticking on when Xi Jinping thinks it's going to be possible that he's going to be strong enough to do what he wants. I guess also there's a clock ticking on terms of the United States' ability to project power. It's a long way around the world to be able to defend Taiwan, and all those neighbors are looking on too. It's not something you want to miscalculate on. If something goes wrong, it's going to be very nasty. Thank you very much indeed, Olivia. It's been a very good conversation. We've covered all of it. Thank you very much indeed for your time.